The air in Hollowbrook was thick with an unsettling chill, like something ancient and hungry was waiting just beyond the mist. The full moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting long twisted shadows on the abandoned streets. Not a soul dared to be out past dark, save for the whispering wind that seemed to carry secrets of things better left unknown. Old houses stood like skeletons, their windows dark and lifeless. In the heart of the town, there was a crooked little shop, nearly forgotten by time, hidden among the overgrown weeds and rotting wood. The sign above the door was cracked, its letters barely legible, Grimwood's Puppetry and Oddities. Mr. Grimwood, an eccentric, pale man in his late 60s, had lived there for as long as anyone could remember. His appearance was as peculiar as his craft. Tall and thin, with unnaturally long fingers, he spent most of his time alone in the shop. Some folks claimed he never left the house, save for the occasional late-night walk. It wasn't until the strange incidents began that anyone really paid attention to him. It started with the sound of soft, hollow tapping on the streets late at night. People in their homes would awaken to hear the clattering of wooden feet, as though something, or someone, was walking with unnatural steps. Then came the stories. Mary, the innkeeper, was the first to speak of it. She swore she saw it from her window one fateful night, the full moon high above. She had just poured herself a cup of tea, when she saw a figure emerge from the alleyway in front of Mr. Grimwood's shop. It was a person, but not quite, she told the few customers who sat in her dimly lit tavern the following morning. A tall, bony thing, like a puppet, its joints cracking with every movement. And it didn't walk like anyone I've ever seen, more like it was dancing. She paused, her voice shaking. I don't know if I imagined it, but I swear it was performing. Her customers laughed it off, brushing it off as one of those tall tales that made its rounds in Hollowbrook. But then it happened again, and again. The reports started to flood in, each more terrifying than the last. One morning, Officer Thompson, a seasoned cop who had lived in Hollowbrook all his life, decided to investigate. He'd heard the stories too, but he wasn't one to believe in ghost stories or rumors. He thought perhaps it was just a prank or some odd figure wandering the streets at night. He stood across from Mr. Grimwood's shop one moonless night, waiting and watching. The clock tower struck midnight, and that's when it happened. The figure appeared. It was tall, impossibly thin, and eerily lifelike. But there was something wrong about it, something that set it apart from a mere human. The way it moved, fluid and unnatural, its wooden limbs creaking and snapping, as if its bones were stitched together, and its eyes dark, hollow, empty. Officer Thompson couldn't take his eyes off it as it danced along the cobblestones, its head turning sharply to meet his gaze. For a moment, there was an unnerving stillness. Then, with a sudden jerk, it sprinted toward him. With a breathless gasp, Officer Thompson ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't stop until he reached the safety of the station. The rest of the night was a blur, but he never spoke of what he saw to anyone. The very next day, Mr. Grimwood was gone. His shop stood as it always had, but he was nowhere to be found. Some said he had packed up and left, others whispered that he'd gone mad. Yet the strange occurrences only grew. On the nights of the full moon, the marionette would appear, its haunting figure silhouetted by the pale light of the moon. It would move along the streets in eerie, deliberate motions, performing grotesque, jerky dances. People swore they could hear the faint sound of strings creaking in the wind. Helen, a young woman from the town, had been especially drawn to the mystery. She had always been curious, and the tales of Mr. Grimwood's marionette gnawed at her mind. One night, driven by a mix of fear and intrigue, she decided to confront the puppet. She stood just outside the shop at midnight, her breath visible in the cold night air. The street was empty, the town silent. But then, just as the moon reached its peak, the sound of tapping echoed through the streets. Helen's heart pounded as she turned to see it. Asterisk, asterisk, the marionette, asterisk, asterisk, standing at the edge of the street. It was alive, or at least it seemed that way. Helen froze, her legs too weak to move. The puppet's gaze locked with hers, its head tilting slightly as if studying her. The full moon glimmered off its cracked wooden surface, and for a brief moment, she could swear she saw something more, something human, inside the puppet's hollow eyes. Then it began to move. Not just a dance, but something more sinister. The marionette's arms lifted, and with a mechanical jerk, it advanced toward her. Helen screamed and turned to run, but the puppet was faster than she could have imagined. She could feel the cold breath of its presence behind her, the unmistakable sound of wooden joints creaking and snapping as it gained on her. With all the strength she could muster, she reached the door of the inn and and slammed it shut behind her. Panting, she stumbled inside, her face pale and drenched in sweat. "What did you see, Helen?" Mary asked, her voice trembling as she helped the girl inside. It was the marionette," she gasped. It's not just a puppet. It's real, and it's moving. I swear it's alive." Mary nodded slowly, her face paling as well. She had heard the same thing, and in the days since, even more people had come forward, recounting similar experiences. There was a silence between them, a fear that settled over the town, for they all knew one thing. The puppet was not just a work of craftsmanship. It was something darker, something alive, born from the bones of forgotten souls. The following day, the shop remained abandoned, and the marionette no longer danced in the streets. Some believed Mr. Grimwood had created it from the bones of the dead, and that it had somehow become more than just a puppet, a vessel for something darker. It was said that Mr. Grimwood had disappeared because he had unlocked something he could not control. To this day, on nights when the moon is full, the people of Hollowbrook hear the soft tapping of wooden feet echoing through the streets. They say the marionette still wanders, seeking its next performance, a grim reminder that some creations should never come to life. And though Mr. Grimwood is long gone, the marionette remains, waiting.